Our next one-person panel features another familiar face to many of us, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. If the last panel was Back to the Future, then I guess this second panel is Back to the Future too. And the Speaker is gracing us with his presence here today. He served as Speaker from 1995 until 1999, and it is an honor for us to have you with us here today, Mr. Speaker. We welcome you, and I'll turn it to the gentleman from Michigan, if he would like to extend.
We're grateful that he's here, and in the interest of time, I think we'll get started.
I turn to the chairman of the full committee. I turn to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Just simply say, since we're Back to the Future 2, where they went out to the Wild West, your bill would give us a carbon footprint equivalent to 1875, which is about when that movie was. So we appreciate our speaker being here.
That's your introduction, Speaker Gingrich. We look forward to hearing from your testimony here today. Whenever you're comfortable, please begin.
Well, let me thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the sheer endurance that you and the members of this committee have shown so far.
Make sure that microphone is on.
I'm sorry, it should be on. Is it not on?
Is the light on?
Yeah, the green light's on, so this should be all right. Okay. I just want to thank you and commend you for the endurance that you all have shown so far.
Can we say, Mr. Speaker, there are 21 witnesses after you, if you were to get a sense of the place we are in the hearing today.
And I want to ask permission for my written testimony to be placed in the record.
Without objection, in its entirety, it will be included in the record. To meet Greg Walden's permanent question, I did begin reading the draft bill, but to be candid, I stopped around page 236, where it describes the Secretary of Energy as a jacuzzi czar under the title Portable Electric Spa. Actually, it's page 233. And at that point, I decided I had the gist of the bill and decided I would develop my testimony. Let me just say, I want to begin with, from a background, I taught environmental studies at West Georgia College, was coordinator. I participated in the Second Earth Day. I supported the clean air system that we developed for sulfuric oxide, which actually involved a very limited number of sites. In the initial application, it was 263 units at 110 plants. Later on, it was expanded to a total of 2,000 units, which the jacuzzi section alone would dwarf. And so I do think there's some substantial differences between what we did in 1990 in a bill that, as a Republican whip, I helped pass, and what you are looking at today. I want to start with two general observations, one from, I guess, my namesake, King Canute, and the other from the Polish resistance to communism, which adopted the principle of 2 + 2 = 4. Canute was asked in the Middle Ages by his staff had been telling him how powerful he was. And so he went down to the ocean and told the waves to stop. And the waves did not stop. And he turned to his staff and said, "This is a hint that I'm not as powerful as you've been saying." This bill strikes me as a remarkable inability to learn the lesson of King Canute. If you look at the housing disaster where the Congress decided 15 years ago people who couldn't afford houses should buy houses and banks should loan money to people who couldn't afford to buy houses, and then you look at the Federal Reserve, which decided that interest rates should be kept low enough to create a huge bubble on Wall Street, we don't seem to be able to learn from any of this. This bill massively expands the Department of Energy's power, gives all sorts of authority to the Secretary of Energy. Let me just quote two examples of why this is a huge mistake. The General Accounting Office said on the Future Gen project, which is very important to this country's future and very important to getting to green coal and carbon sequestration, quote, "Contrary to best practices, DOE did not base its decision to restructure Future Gen on a comprehensive analysis of factors such as the associated costs, benefits, and risk. DOE made its decision largely on the conclusion that costs for the original Future Gen had doubled and would escalate substantially. However, in its decision, DOE compared two cost estimates for the original Future Gen that were not comparable because DOE's $950 million estimate was in constant 2004 dollars and the $1.8 billion estimate of DOE's industry partners was inflated through 2017. So you end up in a situation where in the most important clean coal project of our time, the Department of Energy, which had promised in 2003 to deliver a working plant in 2008, announced in 2008 it might get to a working plant in 2016. On efficiency standards, the General Accounting Office said DOE has missed all 34 congressional deadlines, all 34 congressional deadlines, for setting energy efficiency standards for the 20 product categories with statutory deadlines that have passed. DOE's delays range from less than a year to 15 years. DOE has yet to finish 17 categories of such consumer products as kitchen ranges and ovens, dishwashers and water heaters, and such industrial equipment as distribution transformers. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory estimates the delays in setting standards for the 4 consumer product categories that consume the most energy, refrigerators and freezers, central air conditioners and heat pumps, water heaters and clothes washers, will cost at least $28 billion in foregone energy savings by 2030. DOE officials could not agree on the cause of delays. Now, I just want to suggest to you to take this department and give it 646 pages of additional power is an astonishing avoidance of King Canute's record. The second is that on page 362 in this bill, you in effect mandate an 83% reduction in carbon by 2050. Now, that's exactly like telling the ocean to quit moving. The idea that we're actually going to get an 83% reduction in carbon, in my judgment, is a fantasy, barring a major scientific breakthrough which legislators have zero ability to legislate. You can invest in it, you can hope for it, but to legislate it strikes me as exactly King Canute's rule. On 2 + 2 = 4, I just want to, I put in the record a quote from George Weigel and a quote from Orwell's 1984, both of which point out that the state can tell you 2 + 2 = 5, but it isn't true. Congressman John Dingell captured the 2 + 2 = 4 exactly right when he said earlier today, this bill is a big tax increase. And I want to make this quite clear. This bill is an energy tax. President Obama's budget makes clear it's a $646 billion energy tax. That's what he has in the budget, with an asterisk that says it will raise more than that. The press reports indicate the administration believes that energy tax would actually raise around $1.9 trillion, which for a 648-page bill means it's between $1 and $3 billion a page. Now, energy tax kills jobs, and the Vice President Gore was talking earlier about how China is improving. I just want to quote about India and China 2 things. And this is from my written testimony. India is saying no to crippling its economy, no to stunning its growth, and no to punishing its citizens. One particular member of the Indian delegation to the UN conference in Bonn said, quote, if the question is whether India will take on binding emission reduction commitments, the answer is no. He went on to say this sort of energy tax is morally wrong for India. China, too, believes emission caps are the wrong answer. The lead climate negotiator for China said the following regarding who should pay to cut emissions. Quote, as one of the developing countries, we are at the low end of the production line for the global economy. We produce products, and these products are consumed by other countries. This share of emissions should be taken by the consumers, not the producers. And in fact, what the Chinese are saying is they want us to pay for their emissions on the grounds that we buy their products, which I think is actually a pretty large amount of chutzpah. Energy Secretary Stephen Chu has said, quote, if other countries don't impose a cost on carbon, then we will be at a disadvantage. And I think in this economy at this time, that's the number one thing to look at. An energy tax punishes senior citizens. It punishes rural Americans. If you use electricity, it punishes you. If you use heating oil, it punishes you. If you use gasoline, it punishes you. This bill will increase your cost of living and may kill your job. The Tax Foundation estimates this bill that an energy tax could kill 965,000 jobs and reduce the economy by $138 billion a year. What's even more troubling about this bill, though, is it continues a recent tradition that Congress has adopted, and that is to move from Lincoln's government of the people, by the people, and for the people towards a government which punishes the people into behavior. I favor incentivizing the future. I am opposed to punishing the present. We did not create the transcontinental railroads by punishing stagecoaches. I could strongly support an incentivized bill to maximize new technologies and to maximize green technologies. I'd also point out that Vice President Gore's reference to 30 cents a day came from an intellectually dishonest EPA study which included a 150% increase in the number of nuclear power plants. And the EPA study itself indicated that it had been instructed by the committee staff not to, in fact, base its study on the bill. It's a footnote in the EPA study. Now, prudence suggests that we do need to consider the facts and that there are reasonable, affordable steps that might work. This committee should look at where we Americans as a country can move forward. Vice President Gore cited 3 risks we face: economic concerns, national security concerns, and the environment. I would add a 4th risk, which is the threat of big government, big bureaucracy, big deficits, and political manipulation. And I'd be glad to engage in a dialogue on how we can meet these threats, because I think we do need a serious dialogue. You know, at Vice President Gore's request, I made a commercial with Speaker Pelosi. We said that we would address climate change, that we needed cleaner energy sources, and that we needed a lot of innovation. I can accept all 3 of those. But a dialogue ought to be both ways. It ought to be not an automatic agreement or a salute, but rather a genuine conversation. Vice President Gore made some startling and in some cases I think deeply misleading assertions. He cited Bernie Madoff and described bad information and talked about massive fraud. But in fact, I think that it's very important to look in detail at his own testimony. He said, for example, the rate, this is a quote, the rate of new discoveries is falling for energy. That's factually not true. In the last 3 years, we have found 100 years of natural gas in the United States because we now have new technology drilling at 8,000 feet, and we have literally found 100 years of natural gas in the last 3 years. In Brazil, they found 3 fields, the Tupi field alone in 2007, a second field recently, and just in January, an Exxon Hess consortium found a 3rd field. Brazilian reserves have gone from 10 billion barrels to 100 billion, but of course that's an offshore Atlantic Ocean field, which is up until last October illegal to look for in this country. The Bakken field in North Dakota and Montana has jumped from a 1995 U.S. Geological Survey estimate of 151 million barrels. In April of 2008, they raised it by 2,500%. They now believe there are between 3 and 4 billion barrels of oil in the Bakken field. What Vice President Gore does not tell you is that having supported the government stopping the exploration for oil, having supported the government stopping the development of shale oil in Colorado, having supported the reduction in the use of coal where we have 27% of the world reserves, we're then told that these government-imposed shortages prove we have no resources. That's fundamentally not true. And yet the Obama budget proposes to raise taxes on oil and natural gas development at exactly the time this economy needs more development and more jobs. On the facts of climate change, we need a national inquiry. And let me be quite clear in the spirit of the commercial I did with Speaker Pelosi at Vice President Gore's request. I want to invite Vice President Gore to join in a nonpartisan inquiry. And I'd love to have this committee agree to help sponsor it so that every high school and college campus this coming October could have a discussion about the facts. For example, Vice President Gore in his testimony talked about the likelihood of a 20-foot rise in sea level. Let me say, if we had a catastrophic 20-foot rise in sea level, that would be bad. I'm happy to stipulate that would be bad. However, even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said the probable maximum is between 7 and 23 inches over the next 100 years. Now, 7 to 23 inches over 100 years is radically different than 20 feet. But let me go a couple stages further. A recent report on Greenland, this is from the American Geophysical Union, a report said the following, quote, "So much for Greenland ice's Armageddon." And this is a quote within that. "It has come to an end," glaciologist Tavi Murray of Swansea University in the United Kingdom said during a session at the meeting, quote, "There seems to have been a synchronous switch-off of the speed-up," she said. "Nearly everywhere around southeast Greenland, outlet glacier flows have returned to the levels of 2000. That is from January of this year. On the question of whether or not Antarctic ice is in fact shrinking, let me just quote from the Australians who said, slightly longer, "Antarctica has 80% of the Earth's ice 90% of the Earth's ice and 80% of its fresh water. According to the Australians, extensive melting of Antarctica ice sheets would be required to raise sea levels substantially. Ice is melting in parts of West Antarctica. The destabilization of the Wilkins ice shelf generated international headlines. However, the picture is very different in East Antarctica, which includes the territory claimed by Australia. East Antarctica is 4 times the size of West Antarctica, and parts of it are cooling. The Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research report prepared for last week's meeting of Antarctic Treaty Nations in Washington noted the South Pole had shown significant cooling in recent decades. Australia Antarctic Division Glaciology Program head Ian Allison said sea ice losses in West Antarctica over the past 30 years had been more than offset by increases in the Ross Sea region, just one sector of East Antarctica. Sea ice conditions have remained stable in Antarctica generally, Allison said. So, ice core drilling and the fast ice off Australia's Davis Station in East Antarctica by the Antarctic Climate and Ecosystems Cooperative Research Center shows that last year the ice had a maximum thickness of 1.89 meters, its densest in 10 years, close quote. Finally, on coral die-offs, it's hard to understand why carbon dioxide or current temperatures would lead to coral die-offs. Coral was very abundant in earlier eras when the Earth's temperature was as much as 10 to 15 degrees warmer, and atmospheric CO2 was 2 to 7 times higher. I'm an amateur paleontologist. I would be glad to take the Vice President to the Smithsonian or the American Museum of Natural History, where we can look at all sorts of marine invertebrate life, which is collected as fossils because, in fact, they use carbon quite effectively. All I'm suggesting is that there is a sufficient debate over facts, not over theories, over facts, that would be very useful to have an inquiry on every college and high school campus, allow everyone to present their evidence and discuss, in a way, a genuine dialogue about this. But while I think there is no evidence that we need to rush to a massive energy tax increase or a massive increase in government, there are many steps we could take that are reasonable and that are legitimate. I suggest 38 of them in my testimony. I'm just going to mention a couple quickly here. First, I think we should rebuild the American economy with American energy, both for jobs and for national security. I think it is very important that we have a pro-American energy bias in our system. Second, I do think that green coal and carbon sequestration is the most important single breakthrough we can make, because the objective fact is China is adding 1 coal-burning plant a week. There's no evidence they're going to slow down. And unless you get to an affordable green technology for coal, there is no possibility that American developments are going to affect the volume of carbon in the atmosphere, because the Chinese will more than offset any savings we have. Third, I think that enhanced oil recovery as a component of carbon sequestration could lead to up to 100 billion barrels of additional oil coming out of existing fields, which is a key answer to the peak oil question, which creates jobs in the U.S., keeps money in the U.S., helps our foreign exchange rate, solves an environmental challenge while also solving an economic challenge. Fourth, the U.S. should expand the use of biofuels, including ethanol. And I agree with 2 questions. One, on page 8, why would you exclude biomass from federal forest lands? I mean, I think makes 0 sense in terms of the sound management of federal forest and in terms of biomass. And second, on page 110, why would you exclude energy from municipal waste? If we can get methane production from municipal waste, why isn't that a totally legitimate use of biofuel on a renewable basis? Number 5, you should add a section on nuclear energy. I thought the dialogue between the committee and Vice President Gore was fascinating. China has the largest nuclear building program in the world. Now, if the Vice President wants to come here and tell this committee he's encouraged by China, then he has to confront nuclear energy. The French produce 80% of their electricity from nuclear energy. If we match that, we would take 2,100,000,000 tons of carbon dioxide a year out of the atmosphere. The fact is that Vice President Gore mentioned one-off reactors. That's entirely a function of government policy. If we wanted to, we could follow the Japanese and Canadians, develop a clear model of a routine, repetitive nuclear reactor, build a huge number of them. If you want to lower the cost of building nuclear power plants, streamline the permit system and streamline the litigation system, bring American production down to the rate of Japan or France. It takes 5 years to build a nuclear power plant in Japan. It takes 15 to 20 if you can get past the litigation in the United States. And finally, any notion that civilian development of nuclear reactors by the United States has any impact on nuclear weapons worldwide, I think requires you to ignore that North Korea and Iran are doing quite fine on their own, and they don't seem to have any need for an American nuclear program to develop their nuclear weapons. Sixth, I want to just close by recommending something that, not just to this committee, but to the whole Congress. And this may be bolder than anything that's in the current bill. We are on the edge of a huge opportunity in science. There's going to be 4 to 7 times as much new science in the next 25 years, 65% of it coming outside the United States. We have more scientists alive than all of previous human history. They are every year getting better computers and better instruments. They're connected by email and by zip code, by email and by cell phone. Today, they're then connected to licensing and venture capital and royalties, so they can move from the laboratory to the market more rapidly than ever. We recently had an Alzheimer's study group report that you know fully well about, Chairman Markey, where we proposed a very bold fundamental change in the Budget Act to go from an accountant-designed science budget to ask the scientific community the optimum they could invest. There is no zone other than health where it would be more appropriate than in the field of energy and the environment to fundamentally reshape how we invest in science and to set as a goal very radical, dramatic breakthroughs to get affordable, reproducible, and scalable breakthroughs in energy, which I think are possible. I do think that part of this bill is moving in the right direction. I would love to find a way to design a very bold breakout, whether it's hydrogen, new materials technologies, or a variety of other things. I think they could be there, but I would just close by urging you, don't mandate beyond the technology. When we passed the Act in 1990, we actually knew the technology existed for sulfuric acid to be dealt with. We didn't, and we did it for a very limited number of sites. This is a fundamentally different question, and it threatens the entire American economy. But I appreciate very much the chance to be here.
We thank you, Mr. Speaker, very much.